The children in the lift must mind those doors, mind those doors, mind those doors. Little things on the lift must mind those doors all day long.
There wasn't really anything that I could do. Then we'd take them to Snappy Snaps around the corner in Soho.
And I actually sat next to the newspapers and got my phone out and started reading it on my phone.
Unfortunately, in 2015, I had a bit of a catastrophic, life-changing event.
On the show today, we've got a slightly different take. We've got Scott Shillum, and he's involved in the photography movement. He's the founder of the photography movement. And what we're going to do, we're going to look at some different initiatives and ways of maybe helping your mental health. Scott's not from the lift industry. He's from a communications, video, audio, media type background. But the movements that he's been involved with are really good movements and really do help your mental health if you're into photography and various different things. So we'll chat to Scott about that. But first we'll probably touch on a little bit on your history, Scott, how you got into what you're doing.
Background.
Yeah.
Good. Well, good to be here, Mark.
Yeah, it's great you joined us.
It's an excellent initiative. So just to rewind the clock back to the early 90s, I cut my teeth in journalism, and I was a picture editor for a couple of national newspapers at the time. Both of them no longer exist. And people have often said to me that, you know,
was it Today? Was it the first colour paper?
Well, Today was one of
the
first, one of the first colour papers. But I worked for a newspaper called The European, which was founded by Robert Maxwell.
Okay.
Some people may remember Robert Maxwell.
Yeah.
He actually owned the Daily Mirror and
you don't look old enough.
Mirror Group. Thank you. But I am old enough to be part of that end of the Fleet Street newspaper era.
Yeah.
So I worked as a picture editor on the European newspaper, and then I was picture editor of a newspaper called Sunday Business, which was set up by the Barclay brothers, who went on to own the Telegraph newspaper. Okay. So part of my job was to basically make business stories interesting.
Well, that was a challenge.
A bit sexier. Yeah, and the way that you do that is you just have a really nice, interesting photograph. So instead of having a chief executive portrait, try and find something that the business does and bring that to life through an image, and then that anchors the page, and then the words sort of flow around it. So actually, the mandate from the editor was, we need to make business sexy. We're going to break some really, really heavyweight stories, but I want people to see a visually pleasing publication. So
sounds interesting.
Yeah, that was my sort of remit, really.
Yeah.
And it made me understand the relationship between public relations agencies and people that are trying to basically get stories into the media. And how do you do that? Well, you've got to have a decent story in the first place, but then you've got to have a really good photograph, because newspapers are looking to fill pages, and the cheapest way to fill it is with a big image rather than lots of words.
And that was the era when they was probably paying good money for good pictures as well, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what types. I mean, obviously that was the height of the paparazzi era. Yeah. I mean, ours was much more business focused. And actually, what you used to do is you used to get photographers to take pictures on behalf of companies, and then the companies would give them to the media free of charge. But so that was 10 years of my life, 1990 to 2000.
So what happened to you in the mid sort of 2000s then? So you've done that side.
Well, what happened was I decided that I would set up a business that purely helped companies with the visual bit of their comms strategy, which was basically taking photographs for them on their behalf. So I set the business up with my who was the deputy picture editor of the paper that I worked for. And then my identical twin brother Dan, who at the time was working in sort of sales for an American software company, and he just wanted a career change, and he was better at sales and marketing than I was, and I really knew the pointy end of dealing with all of the media relations that we had and the photographers and all of that. So he came and joined us, and the three of us set up a little business in somebody that we knew had a little office in Soho that they gave us like a glorified cupboard for 6 months rent free. And I remember we bought a Nikon call scanner, which was to scan some negatives.
Like Nikon? So you do like
Great.
Nikon?
Nikon. I've got nothing against Nikon. I used to have a pair of Nikon glasses with Nikon lenses.
There you go.
And we started a little boutique-y business, working with companies doing exactly that sort of model. But the reason we got a call scanner was that a lot of our photographers that we were hiring hadn't transitioned to digital.
Right, okay.
So we used to get them to go and take photos on neg, bring them back, then we'd take them to Snappy Snaps around the corner in Soho. And then we'd scan them on the Nikon call scanner, and then we'd send them out to the picture desks, yeah? And we had a really successful little boutique-y business, just very single point of focus for 5 years, until YouTube was born.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, little pub quiz here,
Okay.
which is, how long's YouTube been around?
Right.
Well, YouTube was actually born on Valentine's Day 2005.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the first video was uploaded to YouTube on 2000, and that really was the start of video for the web.
Right.
Because up until then, how did you watch content? It was on TV, and you didn't really watch it on laptop because you had you still had your modem, and it might have been a little bit more sophisticated.
Sat in the cafe and read a paper.
Yeah, but home broadband wasn't a thing until much later. So when YouTube came along, we had clients that started asking us if we did video. And of course, once two people ask if you do something, you sort of answer yes, and then work out
how you're going to do it.
How to do it.
Yes. What's the question?
It was literally, you do video? Yeah. So that took us up to 2015. But unfortunately, in 2015, I had a bit of a catastrophic life-changing event because my twin brother Dan took his life, and he was very depressed. It'd been a situation that had been ongoing for a while, and I could see where we were and how far down that spiral he was, but there wasn't really anything that I could do once we'd sort of reached that point.
Was he being treated then? Did he
yes, he was seeing somebody, and he was on medication. But again, it's some people are on medication for other things, and it doesn't work. It reaches a point where it becomes something that is terminal, and that's the reality of it. And actually, I remember trying to explain it to my dear old mum, who's no longer with us, because she couldn't understand why he'd done what he'd done. And it was very, very difficult for her. But I said to her one day that, look, you've got to understand that Dan had an illness, and if he'd have had cancer and he died, would you have been angry with him? Because she was just angry that he'd done what he'd done, and it was something that shouldn't have happened. And I said that if he'd had cancer, would you be angry with him? And she said, no, of course I wouldn't. And I said, well, he did have, but it was just a different type.
Well, the thing is, I think when it's only my thoughts on it. When someone's at that point where they're going to do that, sometimes when you're suffering from a mental health condition, whether it's depression, you don't see things clearly. You don't see things how other people maybe see it, and sometimes, you know, I described it. I wasn't obviously at a point like that myself, but I described it as a bit like a washing machine where someone keeps on throwing the washing in and nobody's ever taken anything out, and your mind's a little bit jumbled and you can't quite focus on anything. It's not clear and
full up. Yeah,
it's full up, and I imagine that when someone gets to that point, it's
well, severe clinical depression is. I can only describe it as you just feel dead.
Yeah, hollow. I felt.
Yeah, you don't have any emotion.
Yeah.
You actually, to your point around clarity, your clarity is it's very clear that you're a burden.
Right. Okay.
And that everyone would be better off.
So that's where your clarity is actually.
Yes.
Not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's twisted, but it's crystal clear. And that seems to be the default mindset for people who are at that point. Is I'm useless. I can offer nothing. Everyone will be better off if I'm just not around. And you know, that's quite often the reason why it's done.
Had he tried it before?
No.
Right.
No. But you know, it was obviously something that I knew that there was a danger that he could, but he did sort of tell me categorically that he wouldn't. And the other problem is that in this country, it's very, 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 very difficult to get somebody sectioned. Yeah.
Had he got to that point then before he'd done that? Do you think he should have been before?
And that's a very, very difficult thing to answer, because I also believe in the right to self-determination. So if somebody is forcibly incarcerated, and obviously if you're sectioned, then you know there's a hell of a lot of wraparound to that. But there are obviously cases when that is something that is the only option. So of course we then have the sort of devastating fallout of that. I'm running a business, got 20 staff. He's running the business with me.
Yeah.
Although people knew he was unwell. But he was also determined to not miss work. He said,
Strange,
I've got
isn't
to
it?
be here.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, that was difficult for me, because I was saying to him, look, you need to just, you need to just.
But you don't listen, do you? You know, I don't know about you, but and obviously I wasn't in that position. But you don't necessarily listen to things that you should listen to.
No.
Yeah.
And he said, it's what I do, and I've got nothing. I need to do something. I was like, okay, it was fair enough.
Yeah.
I understood that. So if we then, so that happened. Obviously, it took me a fair deal of time to just process it all. But that didn't trigger any. It didn't trigger a depression. I was
unhappy
grief
about
stricken.
it. Yeah.
I mean, it was devastating, but it was a very different emotion. Because I was emotional. If I'd have been depressed myself and chronically so, then you'd be emotionless, because.
But it didn't trigger anything necessarily.
But it didn't trigger anything. So coming back to that thing of what are the triggers? They're many and varied, and we don't really know. But this is where it comes. It loops back to, I guess, prevention rather than cure.
Yeah.
You know, like anything, it's always best to go and have a checkup to make sure that you haven't got anything, rather than somebody checking you up and you've left it for a couple of years and they go, we're really sorry, but it's an advanced stage. Well, that spiral, and I actually liken it to an orbit of a satellite, and that satellite is just orbiting, and we just orbit around, and we that's your sort of equilibrium. But then slowly and imperceptibly, that satellite just goes slightly out of orbit.
Right, okay.
And as a consequence of that, it's imperceptibly spiralling down out of orbit, and the gravitational pull will ultimately get it to a point where it's never coming back from there, and it's just gonna crash and burn. Yeah. We have, when I say we, me and my mates now have a very good system in place, and it comes out of there's an entity out there called Talk Club.
Right, okay.
So it would be great if people just did a quick bit of search on Talk Club. But Talk Club was set up by somebody that I got to know very well, who came to me through the photography movement, which I set up after Dan's death, and that was because my life had been in and around photography, and I'm not really built for marathon running, and I wanted to sort of make a difference in a positive way, and I thought, well, can I use photography to be the sort of conduit for conversation around mental
based
health
on your
and
history and everything you've done, it seemed to be.
And a picture speaks 1,000 words, so can we use photography, which is very sort of non-threatening? It's something you could sort of easily spark a conversation with, and what could we do? What could we do around that? We decided we were going to have an exhibition on modern masculinity, what it's like to be a man in the 21st century, right? And we would put that brief out to our photographers. And the idea was that we would then have an exhibition, and we'd already spoken to our good friend at Getty, who said that we'd be able to have the Getty Gallery in East Castle Street in the West End for 2 weeks, and we'd do it over Mental Health Awareness Week. And we wanted to then partner with Calm, at the time, male suicide prevention charity, which has now pivoted to be sort of all encompassing. So it's a suicide prevention charity. Yeah. Right. But at the time, it was 2017. It was a male suicide prevention charity, and I discovered them as a consequence of doing my research post Dan's demise, and I found them an amazing sort of comfort, really. I guess is an incredible resource. Stuff that sits on their website. Must be hard
though, because you're looking at that, and then you're seeing other people's stories where they have done similar things.
Well, it's then I started to realise how just crazily prevalent it is, and what an epidemic it is, especially with men. I didn't really have a handle on the stats around it until then. Yeah. And then I was pretty staggered by it. I mean, it's the biggest single killer of men under 45 in this country. I mean, more men die from their own hands than any other single condition. Shocking. I mean, it's staggering, really. So that was a sort of wow moment. You know, just whoa, this is crazy. I mean, this is crazy. So we wanted to raise money for Calm, and we thought, okay, what we could do is we can have an exhibition, see who we can get, see who we can get from the photographic community. We then look to auction the images that we get. We didn't know what images we were going to get, but we auction the images and then we'll make some money from it. What we quickly realised actually is that you to activate this type of stuff, you need resource. You need somebody to sit behind it, to sponsor it. Yeah. because there is a lot of operational things that need to be done that even two of us working full time couldn't organise.
Okay.
Not if you want to then get all the footfall, get the press days organised. I mean, that needs an engine cranking up behind it. But anyway, we ended up with about 85 images, which we had whittled down from about 150. But we got people like Rankin, probably the most famous photographer in the world. A guy called Martin Parr, who's a very, very famous photographer. Nick Knight. I mean, there's several of these photographic luminaries who all just gave us stuff. They either had it dug it out of their archives, or they went and did something unique for it. So we had the most extraordinary mix of imagery at this gallery in the centre of London for 2 weeks. And then selling everything on the last evening, we were able to give Calm a cheque for about £22,000.
Wow.
So that was the first thing that we activated with the photography movement. And
when
we just
was
thought
this then?
that was 2017.
2017 you raised the 22,000 and donated it towards
Calm. Yeah. We then decided that we'd called the photography movement the Calm Photography Movement.
Okay.
To start with.
Yeah.
But then quickly realised that actually, look, it's a catch-all for mental health. This isn't just about men. It's very important that men are engaged with it. But mental health, it touches everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah.
We all have mental health, and most of us will experience poor mental health at some point in our lives. To what level, whether that's a 4 out of 10, a 1 out of 10, or a 0 out of 10, it doesn't matter. It's going to be it's
There's
part
a lot of
of
factors,
it's
support
parts.
mechanisms, how it's impacted, what it is, and how far it actually goes. Really.
Yeah.
So,
And it's the how far it actually goes bit, which is the important bit of what we're trying to do. It's we haven't got all the answers of saving the world from poor mental health, but by doing what we're doing, and by the way, we are not ourselves able to give direct advice. But we are partnering with all of the charities that have got all of the deep data and the expertise, and then we signpost as well. So
how
if we
does
activate a campaign.
So how does it work now then? So as we sit here now, someone might have any interest in photography, they might have an interest in mental health, they might have their own mental health issues, but how does it actually work? Do they come onto your website, or do you raise money?
We do have a website, and that's got our campaigns that we've activated. We've probably done about 6 or 7 campaigns. We did a big project in lockdown for kids called Show and Tell.
Okay.
Which was actually for kids to show how they're feeling through a photograph, and then putting a word with it.
Okay.
So on the Photography Movement website, which is thephotographymovement.com.
Yeah. And I will put these things up. I will put links to them and whatever else.
So the Photography Movement website, the Show and Tell project, which we actually managed to get funding from Cisco. That is a program that is now embedded into over 700 schools in the UK. So what we did was we managed to create these workshops, and it's all using not iPhones. It's not just Apple. It's
other
like
phones
Nikon.
are available.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like Canon's available, not just Nikon. It's smartphone photography. Yeah. So it democratises the photo. Photography's been democratised anyway, but it's not tips and tricks using a DSLR. It's how to get the most out of the camera you're carrying around in your pocket.
Yeah.
So the campaigns go onto the website, and then there are some resources within that, especially with Show and Tell, where there are 8 video workshops, which are all giving you different tips and tricks. We have an Instagram page as well, which is sort of natural home for something like the photography movement.
Okay.
We're always asking people if they would like to collaborate, if they have any projects that they would like us to sort of amplify.
Yeah.
We have recently activated a campaign with Harlequins Rugby Club.
Yeah, I see that. Lendonier. Yeah.
So Lendonier was something that I had this. I like rugby, and I've followed England rugby for better or worse for many years.
Well, it had its sweet spot, but I don't think we're in that now.
No. Well, I went to Japan for the Rugby World Cup in 2019, and I spent the best part of a month travelling around Japan, following them through the pool stages, and then I'd always said to my wife, probably about a year before I went, so it's very unlikely that England will get into the final, but if they did, then I might have to go back. So when they absolutely destroyed the All Blacks in the semi-finals, a week later I found myself back in Tokyo.
Right.
And they got absolutely thumped by South Africa. So it was one of the most depressing weekends of my entire rugby following
highs and lows,
life.
as they say.
Yeah,
sport.
exactly. Well, that was a low. But
you was pretty convincing there. That was
the lowest of the low points. But I'd actually been following Joe Marler's story. So Joe Marler, England loosehead prop, absolute beast of a man, but he'd been struggling with depression and anxiety.
Oh, okay. And was he open about that?
Yes, so he had to dial himself out of an England tour to Australia. He couldn't face it. He was going through some really dark times. It was manifesting on the pitch with some sort of really poor discipline, which he was red carded, and he was spiralling down. But he'd punch holes through doors, and he didn't know what was going on. It was one of those things where quite often it manifests in sort of anger, and you don't understand but it's this is what's happening.
Yeah, it does change your personality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But he wrote in his autobiography about it. Was very open about it. And he's also got these really epically cauliflower ears from spending his entire life at the pointy end of a rugby scrum. So his ears are just
quite distinctive.
Just destroyed. Yeah, I mean they're just classic rugby players' cauliflower ears. And I just this thing just came into my head. I thought, I wonder if we could do something with rugby players' ears and the flip side of talking and listening. Could we do something? So yeah, that'd be good. And then it suddenly came to me, Lendonier, that would be good. Lendonier. I was like, eureka, brilliant. Okay, so all I now need to do is I need to get some high-profile rugby players. Yeah. But wouldn't it be amazing if we could get Joe Marler? Then I managed to get in front of somebody that was running the charitable arm of the Rugby Players Association called Restart Rugby. I had a conversation. He said, yeah, great, love it, but we've got the World Cup coming up. So best we wait until after the World Cup. Everyone will be back. There's the off-season, sort of January, February. Well, let's pick up February 2020. Brilliant, let's pick up February 2020. Of course, we all know what happened after February 2020.
The world stopped.
The world stopped turning.
Yeah.
And so Lendonier became just another idea that just nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
Back end of 2021, I managed to get a meeting with, and this is how sometimes just serendipity plays its part. It was a contact of a contact, and I know the guy that's running the Harlequins Foundation, who was a guy who was ex-Movember, and he'd dropped into the Harlequins Foundation. That's the charitable side of the Harlequins Rugby Club. And it just so happens that Joe Marler has been at Harlequins for 15 years. And you've also got Marcus Smith, who's the New England number 10, Johnny Wilkinson of the modern era, and Danny Kerr, who's an England rugby
been around a
legend,
little while,
right?
Yeah,
and they all play for Harlequins. So I presented this idea to the Harlequins Foundation, and Tabai Matson, who's the coach, well, he's a Kiwi, and he was very, very taken with it as a concept. And I actually had the opportunity to meet him quite quickly after presenting the idea. And he then told me that New Zealand has the highest suicide rates of the, what you'd call the sort of Western.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Never.
yeah, per capita. So if you take the percentage of
Yeah.
against the population, it's the highest. So he said, look, this is a really important thing for us. It was presented to the players, and the players just loved it, and they were like, yeah, absolutely. And Joe Marler was one of the first to put his hand up and said, I absolutely want to be part of it.
Oh, brilliant.
So about 4 or 5 weeks later, I found myself sort of art directing a shoot where we'd done quite a lot of test shoots, because the photographs are very, very specific. It very, very much focuses on the ear and the side profile of the player. It's a very unusual shot. So I spent this amazing day with some of my sort of rugby idols, including Joe Marler, doing the photography, and we then launched the campaign about 6 weeks later, and actually took one of the home games for the Harlequins Gloucester. We had a Lendonere takeover of the Twickenham stoop, so we had all the imagery on big screens around the stadium. We had some T-shirts made up. We had these sort of postcards done with the ears, and then it went out on all the social channels, including the amplification by the players as well.
Wow.
So it was really amazing. And that's made me realise that actually what we need to do now is the photography movement needs to partner with the sports world, because it's all about the amplification of the message.
What do you find works for you though?
So now, so firstly, really try not to sweat the small stuff. Do not try and catastrophise about the future and what that might look like in a sort of 5 or 10 year timeline. Because
I've done that.
And I used to.
Yeah.
If I didn't have something, I used to worry about everything. And if I wasn't worrying about something, I'd worry about the fact I wasn't worrying about something.
Yeah.
I mean, it was ridiculous, right?
Sounds
and I look
identical.
back on it now, and I do realise how ridiculous it was. Now, of course, you know what happened to Dan was the sort of black swan event of all black swan events. It was a catastrophic event, which a year prior to that just wasn't in any viewpoint. It just, it wasn't a thing. Dan was fine. Was good.
Yeah. And then you got that. Obviously that news.
And then a year later. This is what happened. So, the fact is that nobody knows what tomorrow brings, let alone next year, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, what you're going to do for your pension, how you're going to live in old age. We just don't know. We've got no idea what is going to happen next week. We really don't. So, it's trying not to really overthink stuff that you ultimately have no control over. Realising that we only really have control over a very small amount of our life. And that's not something it's not something to worry about. It is. It is what it is, right? You have to make plans. You have to have a bit of a strategy. But for a plan to ultimately come to fruition, whatever that plan is, all of the stars have got to align along the way. Yeah? And even if it's a really small plan, there's going to be a couple of stars that have got to align. And if it's a longer term plan, then there's multiple stars that have got to align. So pre-COVID, having run my business for 20 years, I was looking at, it was a highly saleable business into a bigger marketing comms agency, whatever. And I was looking at what it would look like for me. I was hoping I could spend more time on the photography movement. Can I take a step back? Can I go up to sort of become a, figurehead chairman, make a nuisance of myself, take people out for some nice lunches, take my foot off the gas a bit, let some of the younger people that were there, who are much smarter than me, sort of take over. And that was sort of, that was in my planning in my head. And then COVID hit, and it utterly decimated my business, and I lost it in COVID. Now in 2019, when I'm in Japan watching England lose to South Africa in the Rugby World Cup final, I had no idea what 2020 would bring, and none of us did.
No,
right?
No, that's right. Yeah.
So if you just take COVID as an example of how none of us knew what was around the corner, and we've all come through it, for better or worse, but it was something that none of us had any control over at all.
Yeah.
So you can control micro stuff. Don't jump out of a plane without a parachute is a sensible thing to do if you want to go skydiving.
I'd probably concur with that.
And so there are sensible things you can action, and there are things that you do that are sort of self-preservation and things like that. But self-care and being selfish, right? Now this is an interesting one. Yeah. Because that's a word that's bandied about quite a lot, where you're just selfish. What does that actually mean? Well, what it means is I'm thinking of myself, and I'm thinking of myself for a very good reason. And quite often in a sort of family dynamic, you might be doing something that, from the outside looking in, is a selfish act, but actually it's self-care because you need to be doing something for yourself in order for you to feel good, right? And that might be a thing like, I'm going to go out for a drive with my mates on Saturday, but you can't do that because you've got to cut the grass, or you've got to do. Well, do you know what? But I need to do that because actually it's going to make me feel better. And by me feeling better, I'm going to be able to be a better husband, or I'm going to be able to do something.
Or I want to cut the grass after doing that.
I want to cut the grass, Or that's being selfish. Actually, in a lot of ways, is caring for yourself. Doing something for yourself. On the outside might be being selfish, but actually, it's a positive.
I think we've had
a good old chinwag.
We've had a good old chinwag. We've had a pretty in-depth discussion, and I appreciate you obviously sharing, some of the things you shared, and it's been great to hear about the photography movement and lending ear, and it'd be really good if we could somehow get involved in some of that and
see if we can make it happen.
Make something happen.
But it's great what you're doing. All of this stuff, it's all helping, and if this helps one person, and with the photography movement, I've had people send me emails and stuff coming through from Instagram just saying, this has really made a difference, and thank you so much. And that's nice.
That's brilliant, though, isn't it?
But it's what it's about. If this just helps somebody just to think a bit differently about.
Think a bit differently, have new ideas, realise that there's actually millions and hundreds of thousands and however many people in the same position. It's not actually that unusual at all.
And that's the problem with, especially when you've got that sort of depression and anxiety. It's very isolating. You feel like you're the only person, and everyone else is having the most amazing time.
Amazing time, they're not.
And you're sitting there pretending that you're having an amazing time, and of course from the outside looking in, then somebody else there is pretending to have a good time, seeing you having a good time, except you're pretending to have a good time. So you're both pretending to have a good time, and you're both feeling
nobody's
shit.
Actually well, on that note,
on that bombshell.
No, look, overall, like I said, it's been great. And what I'll do is I'll put the links to everything we spoke about here. They'll be on there. And if anyone wants to go and view it, and obviously I'm sure I can get in contact with Scott via them in some way. Sure. Or anything there.
Yeah, links will be there.
Brilliant.
All right.
So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.